Hi, my name is Katrina Van Gelder, and today I'm going to talk to you about reading comprehension. What is reading comprehension? The easiest way to define it is to understand that you're understanding what you read. Good readers are active and intentional. They construct meaning by using the message in the text read and utilize their prior knowledge of the subject. It requires the reader to interact with the text in many ways. Scarborough's reading rope is a good example of what all the different things that go into or entail in reading comprehension. There are two different main sections here, the language comprehension and word recognition. And each one of these represent a rope. And the more each is understood, the tighter the rope gets. And the tighter the rope gets on both sides, it winds together. And that is an analogy for being a fluent reader that not only is good at reading, but also understands what they've read. According to Clark, if any of the strands are weak or not tight enough, this affects the strength of the whole rope, which is true. The background knowledge is important, but if they read a word and they don't understand the word, then it's going to break down the whole thing as they move forward in reading. This was in one of my classes last year that I learned, or this last semester that I learned, and I thought it was kind of important here, the four-part processing model. This theory shows how the brain processes the different parts of reading. So there's the orthographic processor and the phonological processor down at the bottom. The orthographic processor is how the brain recognizes certain letters. Then it goes to the phonological processor and it takes those letters and makes sounds to make those letters are sounded out to make words. Then it goes up to the meaning processor, and the meaning processor and the context processor work together to try to determine what the word they just sounded out meant. The meaning processor, if they don't understand the meaning of the word, it sends it to the context processor where they try to put that word in context based on the words that are around it, the sentence as a whole, and it goes back and forth. If they can't come to understand what the word means in either the meaning processor or the context processor, then they're not going to be able to comprehend what that word means, meaning they're not going to comprehend what they've just read as well. The mental model. According to the text, the definition of a mental model is when a good reader derives an overall representation of the meaning of the text. Developing a mental model doesn't happen consciously or deliberately. Just as you read, you start to identify the main characters. You might start to see how the plot is forming, the motives that the author is trying to get across, and what they're trying to portray. Strong vocabulary skills are crucial to building mental models when reading, because again, if you don't understand the words, you're not going to understand the plot or the main points they're trying to get across as well. Comprehensive monitoring. It may result in conflicts between prior knowledge and text, which the reader will need to resolve. What that means is basically as they read a sentence and there's a word they come across that they don't understand, again, they'll read the words around that word and what that sentence is trying to say to try to understand what the meaning of that word is. If a word continuously comes up without any comprehension, if they still aren't able to get what that word means, even after looking around the word and reading the sentence again, trying to understand what the sentence or that word is supposed to mean in the sentence, they might need to stop and look it up before moving forward. Comprehension monitoring is one of the skills readers need for effective comprehension. Text structure. Text structure involves how ideas and sentences relate to each other. It also is going to vary based on the type of text you're reading, whether it being a narrative or expository or etc. Narrative is usually fiction. You're going to have a beginning, middle, and end. Expository a lot of times is nonfiction, and it might be instead of a beginning, middle, and end, it'll be compare, contrast, or something like that. And it's going to make you, the way that each are set up is you're going to have to be able to go back and forth in the text structure to comprehend what the author is trying to say to you. Understanding text structure is another important skill when learning reading comprehension. Vocabulary. According to an article I found online on Reading Rockets, there are 4 types of vocabulary. The listening vocabulary are words that we need to know to understand what we hear. So like when I'm talking to my son, what I say to him, if I use a bunch of big words he doesn't understand, he's not going to know what I'm talking about. Speaking vocabulary, same thing. My son could speak to me and use some of the words I spoke to him, but put them in the wrong context because he didn't understand the words at all that he's saying. He just knows the big words, but he doesn't know what they mean and how to insert them properly into the sentences that he's saying. Reading vocabulary are words we need to know to understand what we read, and writing vocabulary words we use when writing. Vocabulary is important because if a beginning reader does not know the meaning of a word as they read and or sounded out, how will they be able to comprehend what they're reading? Things that could affect reading comprehension. Word recognition, not being able to recognize words and know what they mean. Vocabulary knowledge, again, they might can read the word sounded out, but it's a big blank as to what that word means. Decoding, fluency, text structure knowledge, and short-term or working memory. Short-term and working memory goes into the where they use their prior knowledge on a subject to try to understand the meaning of a word, and that prior knowledge is going to be in their short-term or their working memory. Assessing reading comprehension, it's kind of hard to do. There's not one general standard for all children because each child might have a reading comprehensive issue in just one little part of reading comprehension, not all of it. So you kind of have to just pay attention to your kids, and any ones that you think might have some issues, just there's certain things to look out for, which we'll talk about again a little bit later in this presentation. I would say screen each student at the beginning of the school year so you can kind of, get an idea of what some of your students may or may not struggle with. You can give them a passage to read and have them answer questions. You can read that orally to them, or they can read it themselves, or you can do both. You can also access their standardized tests from the previous year and compare them with other children in your class and see if they're where they're supposed to be when it comes to the reading and reading comprehension on those standardized tests. Then continue to test your students periodically to see how they're doing as you teach more skills throughout the year. Diagnose each student and where they need help in regards to comprehension. I mean, it's going to be hard to do, but it's just a case-by-case thing. And more on assessing reading comprehension. As it says in one of the sources I posted, to address reading comprehension deficits, use an approach that teaches vocabulary thinking skills and comprehension first in the spoken language and then in the reading and written language. Like when I was talking about the 4 different types of vocabulary again, if I speak to my son the way that I would someone that I work with or someone in the professional world, he's not going to understand everything that I'm saying. But then he might pick up those words and try to sound like he's smart and say those same words back to someone else, but totally out of context. So if they don't have vocabulary skills, the spoken language first, they're definitely not going to have them in reading and written language. On that note, if you notice a student has any of the following that I have listed here, you definitely need to administer a comprehension assessment of some kind to determine if they're at their grade level, and if not, what issues that they have the most, what problems they have the most, so that you can set up some kind of lesson plan going forward for that child. If they understand fewer spoken words, have bad spoken grammar, or understand less of what they hear than they should at their age, then there's definitely an issue there, and they won't be able to comprehend what they read if they're having problems here. Teaching vocabulary. Over here to the right is a graphic organizer I found that is a really good one for teaching vocabulary. Shows you in that big circle at the top on the left, it says word. You put the word there, then you have the child write a definition of what they think that word means, synonyms and antonyms, and just have them fill out as much of this as they can. And again, you can talk about this in class and have everyone kind of stand up and say what they think. Synonyms, antonyms, pictures, all those things that can mean, and it will help everyone in class understand each one of those words better. Thinking strategies. The SQ3R method is one of the methods that I read about in the book. It stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. Basically, the survey is you scan the text, you pay attention to like the headings, the beginning, the middle, the end, the summaries, the layout, the opening paragraphs, the graphics. You form questions about what you surveyed using the who, what, when, where, why questions. Then you read, you try to answer your questions as you read the text. So you're reading the text, you try to answer all those questions. You recite, you say those questions and answers out loud and summarize the author's meaning in your own words. And a day or two later, you're going to review that. See if you can still answer those questions without going back and reading the book. Thinking strategy, again, the KWL, what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned. It's another good graphic organizer to use and thinking strategy to use. Using thinking strategies. Discuss or activate prior knowledge, develop questions while reading, connect with their reading in their life, visualize. All these things right here are good to use after you've used those thinking strategies. Here are my references. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.